I have to say, I'm surprised by yesterday's survey result. Should 8,500 American troops be deployed as part of a NATO response to Russian aggression in Ukraine? There were 8,039 votes cast, almost as many troops who could be deployed. But the part that surprised me was that 74.88%, let's call it 75%, three-quarters said yes. Three-quarters of the more than 8,000 who voted at Smerconish.com yesterday say 8,500 American troops should be deployed as part of a NATO response to Russian aggression in Ukraine. With regard to today's survey question, I know you're going to love this one. How ironic. How ironic that 2 days ago, on Tuesday, the survey question at the website asked, should universities consider the race of applicants when trying to build diverse student bodies? And I asked that survey question, of course, because we had just learned that the Supreme Court of the United States had accepted argument in two cases, one involving Harvard, the other involving UNC at Chapel Hill, both on the question of affirmative action in the college admissions process. And so in talking about that on Tuesday, I provided a pretty long history of the Supreme Court handling of race and college admissions. In 1978, don't worry, this is just the short version, but hang with me on this. In 1978, the court banned quotas in a case called Bakke. I think it was Bakke versus California. Maybe it was Bakke versus the Regents of California. But Bakke stands for the proposition that there cannot be quotas. Okay? Differentiating now between quotas and affirmative action. In 2003, the case was called Grutter. And in the Grutter opinion, the court decided that race could be considered. Quota couldn't be the case, but race could be considered as one of many elements used to construct a diverse student body. You might also remember that it was Sandra Day O'Connor who wrote the majority opinion. It was a 5-4 decision in which she famously said that she hoped 25 years into the future, there'd be no need for affirmative action in the college admissions process. By the way, do the math, because the 25-year mark from when she said that would take us to 2028, 6 years from now. Was she right as it applies to 2022? The Chicago Tribune had the coverage of what Sandra Day O'Connor said at the time. This is just a footnote, a little bit of interesting history. They wrote this, looking 25 years into the future, O'Connor said, I hope it looks as though we don't need artificial help to fill our classrooms with highly qualified students at the graduate level. So that's what she said at the time. Next, it's 2016. Again, the subject is affirmative action in the college admissions context. There's a 4-3 decision in a case called Fisher. This involved the University of Texas. There was no Kagan. Scalia had passed. Kagan had recused herself. So it was a 4-3 decision. Only 7 justices weighing in. Bottom line, in the Fisher case, use of race as a factor was again upheld. So the modern precedent on this issue relative to race, relative affirmative action, no quotas, you can use race as one of many factors. Now comes the challenge to both admissions at Harvard and UNC at Chapel Hill. What has changed since 2016, of course, is the age of Trump with, count 'em, 3 conservative Supreme Court justices. So now you've got Gorsuch, you've got Kavanaugh, you've got Coney Barrett, and come October, the Supreme Court of the United States will hear these cases. And here's the kicker. Sitting on the bench in October, deciding the case, will be a justice selected by Joe Biden who fits his pledge that they are both black and female. That's an amazing thing, is it not? Just given the context of the way college admissions has been handled and how, the delicate subject of affirmative action, which it seems, based on the composition of the court and in particular what Chief Justice John Roberts has said about affirmative action in the past, it would seem that affirmative action, as we know it in college admissions, is about to come to an end just at a time when one of the justices who will hear the case arguably was put on the court through a form of, well, political affirmative action. The court will be deciding the propriety of affirmative action with a brand new member of the court who will be viewed in some quarters as owing her position to a form of affirmative action. And I'm not the only one to notice this. Read today's Wall Street Journal op-ed by Professor Jonathan Turley from GW. And Turley correctly says, it didn't have to go this way. In other words, he writes that the president could have selected a black woman on the court while maintaining, as universities do, that he would consider all possible candidates on the totality of their records. That's what Turley said. And Turley further notes that the three who are presumed to be on the short list are all worthy on the merits. Justice Leandra Kruger of the California Supreme Court, U.S. Circuit Court Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, U.S. District Judge Michelle Childs. Those are the three most bandied about at this time. But you know why Biden finds himself in this position. He finds himself in this position because he was in desperate need of a momentum shift in the nomination fight against Bernie Sanders just as they were going in for the South Carolina primary. As a matter of fact, in a debate, it was Charleston in February of 2020, and with Jim Clyburn in the House, then former Vice President Biden said this.
Number one, I committed that if I'm elected president, have an opportunity to appoint someone to the courts, I'll appoint the first black woman to the courts. It's required that they have representation now. It's long overdue.
So, there was the pledge. And of course, you know what ended up happening. Biden famously wins South Carolina. Everything turns on a dime. Bernie loses his steam and Joe Biden goes on to win the presidency. When he said in South Carolina what he said and made that pledge that he would appoint a person of color, a female of color, to the Supreme Court, he was still smarting from what had transpired. I think it was the first debate. I know that it was June of 2019 in Miami when it was Senator Kamala Harris who called him out on busing.
Also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing.
Look, remember that? It was an attempt at takedown. It wasn't successful ultimately. She dropped out before any votes were cast, but I remember it well. The T-shirts literally were marketed that night, and it became a fundraising tool for the ill-fated Kamala Harris presidential campaign. But Jonathan Turley, I think, correctly says Mr. Biden is now going to create one of the more jarring and incongruous moments in the history of the Supreme Court. This fall, in the Harvard and University of North Carolina cases, the justices will hear arguments that the use of race in admissions is unlawful discrimination, and one of them will have gained her seat in part through exclusionary criteria of race and sex. So that's the substantive response to the announcement, which will be formalized today by Justice Breyer at the White House with President Biden, the man who presided, by the way, over the Senate Judiciary Committee and marshaled Breyer's appointment through the Senate. Today, they'll formalize the fact that Breyer is retiring. It'll come at the end of the summer term, and it means that by next fall, because Republicans they could erect some hurdles, but really no roadblocks, Joe Biden's about to get a pick for the Supreme Court of the United States. That's the substance. What I'm about to add is the fun. This is not going to happen. But should it? This is not going to happen. But it's not going to stop me from talking about it. I read to you the short list of those who are presumed to be under serious consideration. It's not a long list, and it kind of by definition can't be a long list, but I want to address that And I said that Judge Brown Jackson seems to be the front runner. Who is she? She's a Harvard Law grad. She served as a clerk to Breyer. From 1999 through the year 2000, she interviewed with former President Barack Obama for former Justice Antonin Scalia's vacancy in 2016. After the Supreme Court, the court on which she sits, which is the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, is arguably, I've always referred to it as a proving ground or a minor league for Supreme Court picks because it is believed to be the most important circuit in the nation. It has jurisdiction over cases involving Congress and the executive branch. It is the court from which Merrick Garland, now the Attorney General, came. Jackson was the first black woman confirmed to an appellate court in a decade. And when I say it's a relatively short list, if the president's going to select someone who's black and female, it's for this reason. By the way, no requirement that the Supreme Court nominee even be an attorney. But the modern practice, the modern experience has been to select someone and to select someone from an appellate level. There are 6 black female circuit court judges currently serving. 39 active black female federal judges out of 793 in total. So if, as a practical matter, even though not even a legal background is required, if as a practical matter you want to take someone from the federal bench, it's a short list if you're saying they need to be of color and female as well. Interesting that she was confirmed in June of 2021, so not long ago. The vote was 53-44. The Republicans who voted with all the Democrats, Senators Lindsey Graham, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. Now the real fun part. What about another candidate? Female? Okay, Joe, we've got a female. African American? Yes, she is. This candidate is a former prosecutor, a former United States Senator, and a sitting vice president of the United States. What about Kamala Harris? Let's just think it over for a second. Let's just kick this around and view the pluses and the minuses. I'm not saying it is going to happen. In fact, I'm saying it's not going to happen. I want to be clear on that. But I do believe it's at least worthy of consideration by the White House. Does it make sense for each of them? Let me try and make the case, both for the president and for the vice president. For his case, why would he contemplate Kamala Harris? Or why should he at least consider Kamala Harris? Well, his numbers are terrible. I have any number of data points in front of me that I could rely on. I'll go with Pew only because it's most recent, just 2 days ago. A 41% approval rating. A 41% approval rating according to Pew. Now, some have been better and some have been worse. But that's roughly where they're coming in. He's got crises on many fronts. Inflation, a 40-year high. Ukraine, Putin poised to invade certain areas of Ukraine, if not the whole country. COVID, still out of control. Crime, border crises, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He needs a monumental shift. He's not going to get it legislatively. In fact, some other observation I wish to make is that this nomination fight, although I think it long-term suits the president well, but it's going to take all the oxygen out of the room on Build Back Better. I mean, they can't walk and chew gum at the same time, no matter what they say. This is going to be the dominant issue. The appointment's going to get made within the next month. And for the next several months, this will be the dominant issue in Washington unless there's some unforeseen catastrophe. Will it shift momentum for the midterms that the president has appointed a black female to the Supreme Court? Will that rally the Democratic base? I don't know. The court has really never been a rallying cry for the Democratic base in the way that it has been for Republicans. But maybe a new partner in Washington would help the president of the United States. Here's another fun subject, just for shits and giggles. Who could that be? Who could that be? What if he were to offer to Vice President Kamala Harris the Breyer seat on the Supreme Court of the United States? Who then becomes that partner? Top of my mind, Mayor Pete. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg? How about Gina Raimondo? If you want to make sure that it's still a female, the current Secretary of Commerce, who has been getting good reviews. I'll give you another name that popped into my head. How about Mitch Landrieu? How about Mitch Landrieu, who is currently serving as the infrastructure czar? Maybe it's Jennifer Granholm. Again, if you wanted to have a strong resume, female, someone coming out of the cabinet. You know, it's funny. He didn't know that I was going to go in this direction today, but I was swapping email earlier this morning with my friend Dr. Maz, right? Anthony Mazzarelli, who has guest hosted this program on several occasions. Having no idea that I would be on this train of thought, he posed to me, why not Kyrsten Sinema? Why not the Arizona governor has to appoint from the same party. Biden then has a little more solid ground in the Senate. Same as with Manchin as a VP. Seems even less likely, right? But fun stuff. Okay, what's the case for Kamala Harris? That she should consider an offer, if an offer were forthcoming, to sit on the Supreme Court of the United States. Well, how about this? Whether you think fairly or unfairly, her numbers are as bad as the president's numbers. I cited Pew for the president. I have a CBS. Not all the surveys seek an approval rating of both the president and the vice president. But here, CBS just 1 week ago, Biden at 44% approval, Kamala Harris in the same position. She was given two prominent responsibilities: voting rights and the situation with the border, or I guess she would say focusing on the point of origin. In fact, she's headed to Honduras, I think, today. The voting rights legislation appears to be going nowhere, and the border situation has gotten no better, and those numbers of people crossing illegally remain at all-time highs. I don't see her, you may disagree with this, I don't see her being elected president of the United States. I think that she's the likely candidate if Joe Biden doesn't seek re-election, but I don't think that it's a slam dunk that, in fact, far from it, that Kamala Harris, as the Democratic nominee, is elected president of the United States. You tell me, what happens in a Harris-Trump matchup? I mean, I think he would relish that fight. Maybe she relishes that fight. God forbid if we're really going to have the brass tacks conversation, God forbid something happens to the president. Surely don't want that to be the case. But she could become president from her perch of being the vice president if her ambition, and I think the ambition of all of them at that level, is to sit in the Oval Office. If her ambition is to sit in the Oval Office, then I guess she stays right where she is, doesn't hope for anything untoward, but uses the strength of that position to be ready or to seek the nomination when Joe Biden is not running for the presidency. Biden's 79. She's 57. This is the ultimate escape hatch if she's of a mindset that the vice presidential job is just not what it's cracked up to be. She'd be another first, having been the first female vice president, having been the first vice president of color. Now she would be the first African-American female justice. Let me tell you something about wearing a robe at the Supreme Court. A lot less heat, a lot less scrutiny, and they work banker hours. In fact, they work school hours. I've often lamented that they don't have a busy enough docket, that they could be handling many more cases than they're handling. It's a great, prestigious gig. She's having dinner with Doug every night. Hands don't get dirty, People aren't as nasty. You're working behind closed doors. Joe Biden, here's the pitch. Joe Biden should at least consider Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris, for the reasons that I've just discussed, I'm not advocating for Kamala Harris. I'm not assessing her fitness for the job. I'm just talking about the human factors and the political factors. Biden ought to consider Harris. And Harris ought to consider the gig if it were offered. What do you think? Comment by dialing the phone at 855-486-1776. Won't happen. Should be considered. Won't happen. Should be considered. I'm back after this.